Fine. Exactly where the yellow tabs indicate, Miss Davies, Kevin Marshall instructed, his voice as dry as the autumn leaves scraping against his Seattle office window. Chloe stared at the fake stack of legal documents resting on the polished mahogany. She was 32, an architect who built her life entirely around structure, predictability, and logic. Her parents, Richard and Diane Davies, were retired middle school teachers living in a sun-baked condominium in Scottsdale, Arizona. They had always told Chloe she was their miracle, adopted through a closed, private agency after a decade of agonizing fertility struggles. They had given her a childhood painted in pastel perfection piano lessons, summer camps, and an unwavering, almost suffocating stream of affection. Yet the manila folder under her trembling fingertips contained the deed to a massive, secluded property in Astoria, Oregon. It was bequeathed to her by a woman named Evelyn Harper, who had succumbed to heart failure exactly 21 days ago. "Mr. Marshall," Chloe began, her throat tight. "I have never heard the name Evelyn Harper in my life. My parents never mentioned her. There has to be some sort of clerical error." The elderly attorney offered a sympathetic, tight-lipped smile and adjusted his wire-rimmed spectacles. "There is no error, Miss Davies. Evelyn was incredibly specific in her will. The estate on 42nd and Harrison is entirely yours, free and clear of any liens. She also left you a sealed letter, though she gave me strict instructions not to hand it over until you returned from your first visit to the property." 2 days later, rain lashed brutally against the windshield of Chloe's rented Ford Taurus. The coastal highway leading into Astoria was cloaked in a suffocating gray fog, the Pacific Ocean churning violently to her right. Her knuckles were white on the steering wheel. She had told Richard and Diane she was attending an architectural symposium in Portland, a white lie that tasted like ash in her mouth. She didn't want to worry them, not until she figured out why a total stranger had left her a Victorian estate. The GPS eventually directed her away from the quaint downtown and up a winding, heavily wooded hill. The road degraded from pavement to crushed gravel, ending abruptly before a rusted wrought iron gate. Beyond it sat the house. It was a staggering 3-story Victorian structure, its navy blue paint peeling like sunburned skin. Overgrown ivy choked the wraparound porch, and the windows were dark, staring out at the stormy landscape like hollow, unblinking eyes. It was a house that had not seen laughter or light in decades. Chloe killed the engine. The silence in the car was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of rain on the roof. She grabbed the heavy brass key Marshall had given her from the passenger seat, zipped up her raincoat, and stepped into the storm. The front door groaned in protest as she turned the key and pushed it open. The air inside was freezing and smelled heavily of damp earth, old paper, and dried lavender. Chloe fumbled for a light switch, but the electricity had long been shut off. She clicked on her heavy-duty flashlight, casting a stark white beam across the foyer. Everything was draped in white canvas sheets, turning the furniture into a graveyard of formless ghosts. She moved slowly through the ground floor, her boots echoing ominously against the hardwood. The living room, the formal dining room, the massive kitchen, all impeccably clean beneath the dust, preserved like a tragic museum exhibit. In the hallway, she found a silver-framed photograph resting on a credenza. Chloe wiped the dust from the glass with her thumb. It was a picture of a woman in her late 20s, laughing brightly on a beach. Chloe's breath caught in her chest, a sudden wave of dizziness washing over her. The woman in the photo had her eyes almond-shaped and hazel. She had Chloe's exact jawline, the same slight crook in her nose, and the identical dusting of freckles across her collarbones. It was Evelyn Harper, and the resemblance was terrifyingly biological. A cold dread pooled in Chloe's stomach. Closed adoption. That was what Richard and Diane had always said. But looking at Evelyn, a dark, intrusive thought clawed its way into Chloe's mind. Had her parents known Evelyn? Had Evelyn been a teenage mother who gave her up and regretted it, watching from afar? Seeking answers, Chloe made her way up the grand, curving staircase. The second-floor housed several bedrooms, all locked in the same dusty silence. But at the very end of the hall stood a heavy oak door that looked entirely different. It wasn't covered in cobwebs. The brass knob was polished, showing signs of recent, frequent use. Chloe turned the knob. It was locked. Panic and adrenaline beginning to mix, she searched the immediate area, finally running her fingers along the top of the door frame. Her hand brushed against cold metal. A small, silver key. She slid it into the lock. It clicked. Chloe pushed the door open, stepping into a room that would shatter the foundation of her reality forever. It was not a bedroom. It was a command center. The walls were entirely obscured by massive corkboards, connected by an intricate web of red yarn, photographs, and police sketches. In the center of the room sat a large desk covered in meticulously organized, color-coded binders. Fluorescent camping lanterns were staged around the room, which Chloe quickly switched on, illuminating the space in a harsh, clinical glow. Her eyes darted to the largest corkboard directly in front of her. At the top, pinned beneath a plastic sleeve, was a weathered front page of the Astoria Daily Independent, dated November 14, 1994. The headline screamed in bold black ink, "Iana Fontet, girl abed decided from Harper Estate." Paulus Bofflet by DSAP fled by DSAP parents as Bobby Nora. Beneath the headline was a photograph of a crying Evelyn Harper clinging to a pale pink baby blanket. Beside it was a close-up photo of an 8-month-old infant. Chloe staggered backward, her legs hitting the edge of the heavy desk. The flashlight slipped from her grip, clattering onto the floorboards. She knew that baby photo. She had the exact same picture tucked away in her baby album back in Seattle, only Richard and Diane had claimed they took it on the day they brought her home from the agency. "No," Chloe whispered, her voice cracking in the desolate silence. "No, no, no." She moved frantically to the next board. It was covered in age-progressed sketches. Nora at age 5. Nora at age 10. Nora at age 16. Beside the sketches were candid, grainy photographs taken from a distance. Chloe staring out the window of a school bus. Chloe eating ice cream at a park in Scottsdale. Chloe walking across the stage at her high school graduation. Evelyn hadn't given her away. Evelyn had been hunting for her missing daughter for almost 30 years. Tears hot and blinding blurred Chloe's vision. Her parents, the gentle, soft-spoken educators who baked cookies and helped her with calculus, were kidnappers. They had stolen a baby from this sprawling estate and fled to Arizona. The sheer logistical impossibility of it fought against the undeniable proof staring back at her. How did 2 middle school teachers pull off a flawless abduction? Chloe collapsed into the leather chair behind a desk, her trembling hands pulling one of the heavy black binders toward her. The spine read, "The Davies Extortion, 1995 to present." Extortion. She flipped the binder open. Inside were hundreds of clear plastic sleeves holding bank statements and copies of handwritten letters. Chloe recognized the jagged, distinctive handwriting immediately. It was Richard's. She pulled out the first letter, dated exactly 1 year after the kidnapping. "Mrs. Harper, Nora is safe. She is eating well, sleeping through the night, and is deeply loved. If you want her to stay safe, and if you want her to grow up without the trauma of being ripped away from the only family she knows, you will follow my instructions perfectly. $5,000 on the first of every month, wire to the offshore account provided. If you ever contact the police again, if you ever hire another private investigator, or if you miss a single payment, we will leave the country. You will never see her face again. You are paying for her perfect life. Do not ruin it." Chloe felt the bile rise in her throat. She slammed her hand over her mouth, a muffled sob ripping through the empty house. She turned the pages frantically. Bank statements spanning 3 decades. $5,000 a month. Then $10,000 when Chloe was ready for college. Evelyn Harper, the wealthy heiress to a Pacific Northwest logging empire, had been systematically bled dry. She had funded the perfect life Richard and Diane had so proudly provided. The piano lessons, the trips to Disneyland, the expensive out-of-state tuition for Chloe's architecture degree, it was all paid for by her biological mother's agonizing ransom. The deepest, most sickening twist lay in the final pages of the binder. Chloe found a printed dossier from a private investigator Evelyn had eventually hired in secret just 5 years ago. Target summary: Richard and Diane Davies. Background: the subjects never operated under aliases. They did not snatch the child in a crime of opportunity. Richard Davies was employed as the Harper Estates groundskeeper in 1993. Diane was the head housekeeper. Chloe gasped for air as the room spun. They weren't strangers, they were employees. They had watched Evelyn carry her, had smiled at the baby, had plotted the abduction from inside this very house. And worst of all, Evelyn knew exactly who had taken her daughter. She had known all along but was entirely paralyzed by the terror of Richard's threats. She chose to pay the ransom, funding her own daughter's captors just to ensure Chloe remained safe and cared for. Evelyn sacrificed her own motherhood, living in this rotting, empty house so Chloe could live in the sun. The last entry in the binder was a bank transfer receipt dated 24 days ago. Just 3 days before Evelyn's heart finally gave out. Chloe sat in the deafening silence of the room, the scent of dust and dried lavender suddenly feeling like a tomb. Her entire existence was a carefully constructed monstrous lie. Every I love you, every bedtime story, every comforting hug from Richard and Diane was the calculated performance of sociopathic extortionists treating her as a highly lucrative hostage. Suddenly, the jarring ringtone of her cell phone shattered the quiet. Chloe flinched, staring at the screen. The caller ID flashed brightly in the dim room. Mum, I hanged. For a long moment, Chloe just watched it ring. Her thumb hovered over the red reject button, but a profound icy rage was beginning to eclipse her shock. She swiped the green icon and brought the phone to her ear. Hi, sweetie, Diane's voice chirped through the speaker, warm and sickeningly familiar. Dad and I were just thinking about you. How is the conference in Portland? Is the weather dreadful? Chloe closed her eyes. She pictured Diane sitting on her pristine white leather sofa in Scottsdale, entirely oblivious to the fact that her 3-decade reign of terror was over. The weather is terrible, Diane, Chloe said, her voice dropping an octave, dead flat and devoid of any daughterly warmth. There was a slight pause on the line. Diane, sweetheart, are you feeling okay? Did you just call me Diane? I'm not in Portland, Chloe said, her eyes fixed on the age-progressed sketch of her 16-year-old self. I'm in Astoria, at 42nd and Harrison. I'm sitting at Evelyn Harper's desk. The silence that stretched across the phone line was absolute. It was the sound of a carefully built universe collapsing into the void. The background noise of the television in Arizona was abruptly muted. Chloe. Diane's voice came back. It was no longer warm, it was no longer maternal. The cheerful chirp was gone, replaced by a cold, metallic razor sharpness Chloe had never heard in 32 years. Listen to me very carefully. Step out of that house, get in your car, and drive back to Seattle. You do not want to open this door. Evelyn is dead, Chloe whispered, tears finally spilling hot and fast down her cheeks. She died 3 weeks ago. Did the monthly wire transfer bounce, Diane? Is that how you found out? Did you check your offshore account before you checked the obituaries? We gave you everything, Richard's voice suddenly boomed through the phone, having clearly been put on speaker. He sounded furious, defensive. She was a depressed, unfit widow who didn't know how to raise a child. We gave you a beautiful life, Chloe. You owe us everything. My name is Nora, she breathed out, the words feeling incredibly foreign but undeniably right. You stole me. You tortured my mother until her heart stopped. You listened to me, you ungrateful little brat, Richard snarled. We have legal adoption papers. Forged, but flawless. You go to the cops with this and you'll destroy the only family you have. You'll be the daughter of a crazy dead woman, and you'll send the people who raised you to federal prison. Is that what you want? Chloe looked down at the desk. Beneath the binder of extortion letters lay a small, framed photograph. It was Evelyn, looking exhausted but smiling softly, holding a tiny pair of pink knitted booties. Written in delicate cursive on the bottom of the frame were the words, "For Nora." Whenever she finds her way home, a profound calm washed over Chloe. The terror evaporated, leaving only a steely, unbreakable resolve. I am going to send you to prison, Chloe said, her voice steady and clear as a ringing bell. Both of you. I am going to make sure you die in a concrete cell, and I am going to take back every single cent you bled for my mother. Chloe, don't you dare, Diane began, panic finally piercing her cold facade. Chloe ended the call. She powered the phone down and slipped it into her pocket. She carefully gathered the Davies extortion binder, clutching it tightly against her chest like a shield. She walked out of the command center, locking the heavy oak door behind her. As she descended the grand staircase, the shadows of the Victorian house no longer felt oppressive. They felt protective. She wasn't an intruder anymore. She was the rightful heir, walking through the halls her mother had paced for 30 years, waiting for her return. Chloe stepped out onto the porch, pulling the heavy front door shut until it clicked securely into place. The rain was still coming down in sheets, but as she walked down the overgrown steps toward her car, she didn't bother pulling up her hood. She welcomed the cold shock of the water. She opened the car door, tossed the binder onto the passenger seat, and started the engine. The GPS screen glowed brightly in the dark cabin. She typed in a new destination, put the car in drive, and headed down the winding gravel road, driving straight toward the Astoria Police Department.